I grow pickling cucumbers every year. Normally, they're this high, 6 feet high. And this year, they got about 3 feet and died. I did not get a mulch on this garden until sometime in July. Hey, it's Greg here at maritimegardening.com, and I thought I'd do a video today just contrasting some of my garden beds. Ones that I, mulch the way I normally mulch them, and others where I was kind of lackadaisical, kind of procrastinating about mulching. So my normal technique here in this garden is, every bed gets mulched in the fall, and has like a nice little sort of blanket of mulch on it for the entire winter, just like all the soil in the forest, that sort of thing. Copying nature, as you should do, as this is good advice. And then when it's spring, I either take all the mulch off or I move some of the mulch aside, plant my seeds. Once the plants are about 6 inches high, put the mulch back, right? You move the mulch back for a number of reasons. The main reason is to allow the sun to heat the soil up and get things germinating. That's important where I live. I live in Nova Scotia, Canada, where it's kind of cold, and getting the soil heated up in spring is critical to germination. But once everything gets growing and it's about 6 inches high, you move the mulch back. Anyway, this year, around the middle of May, I got COVID. And I felt like crap for about a week. But then for like almost 2 months or following that, I was just kind of low energy and just not my usual self. And I just kept putting things off, and I'll do that tomorrow, I'll do that later. I really did procrastinate a lot in the garden, and things just did not get mulched the way they should have. Some things I didn't actually get the mulch on them until like sometime in July. And for some things that was okay, and they sort of recovered and gave me a yield. And for some things it was really too late and they were stunted. So I'm just going to take you around the garden and show you some of that for just a teachable moment. I mean, ever since I learned about mulching in a garden, learned about permaculture, I've been, completely on board with the idea. There's some drawbacks to keeping everything mulched, but for the most part, the benefits by far outweigh the drawbacks. You don't have to water as much, you don't have as many weed problems, the mulch breaks down, the soil organisms sort of devour that decomposing mulch material, and that in turn fertilizes your plants. You're right, there's no real downside, and the soil improves over time because it's the ideal environment of the soil organism, so it's the greatest thing to do. This year, because of getting COVID and just being kind of lazy as a result of that, it was kind of like a natural experiment, because some of the beds I got around to properly mulching them, some of them I did it a bit later, and some of them I didn't do it at all. So I'm going to show you all those different sort of things. It's like kind of like a garden tour, but not exactly. It's like success and failure and results of not mulching. So let's start first with the worst thing. So right here I've got a cucumber garden. I grow pickling cucumbers every year. Normally, they're this high, 6 feet high. And this year, they got about 3 feet and died. I did not get a mulch on this garden until sometime in July. You plant your cucumbers around the beginning of June, give or take, right? So I can't remember how far into July it was when I actually did. It might have even been the beginning of August. I was really late with mulching. And so, some people might say, oh, you didn't have good soil, you didn't have good sun, blah, 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 blah. But look at this beautiful parsley growing here. Look how green it is. Look how vibrant it is, right? Soil isn't the problem. Sunlight isn't the problem. I've grown cucumbers in this garden before, and everything I've ever grown in this garden has grown well. But I always mulch everything. What I think happened was that these cucumbers, because I was so late in getting a mulch, and they germinated well and they grew well, and it's a variety I've grown before. Okay, so there's no new variables here, right? And it gets reasonably good sun here in this spot. The variable, I think, and this is a raised bed. It's not hugely raised, but this is not an area that gets swampy and waterlogged, right? So, the seeds would have been about 4 inches above grade, which is all that's needed here in terms of preventing things getting waterlogged and so on. So I don't think any of the possible explanations are the reason. And I'm going to show you all the other beds. You're just going to see the pattern, right? What happened, I believe, or I think is most likely the case, is that because they weren't mulched, they didn't have constant moisture on really hot sunny days, and so on certain days when the plants were quite young, they were stressed. And when cucumbers are stressed when they're young, they stunt. They just don't grow right. They never grow right. They have to have everything right all the time, and then they'll grow right. If they're stressed when they're developing, when they're relatively, under a foot high, they just don't grow right. They never develop properly. So by the time I got the mulch onto this garden, which is in time enough to save these parsley, and I had dill growing here too, it just wasn't enough to turn things around for the cucumbers. The damage is already done. Now, I got some cucumbers, and I was able, I got a yield off of this. I was able to make about 2 gallons of pickled cucumbers, but I usually have pickles coming out of my ears. Right, I usually make like 6 gallons of pickled cucumbers, and we're eating cucumber salad. We're eating cucumbers in every way you can imagine out of this garden. Whereas this year we just had enough to, we enjoyed our cucumbers this year, but it was nothing like I usually get. So yeah, mulch was on way too late. Didn't save the cucumbers. Over here I got a garden of beets, and I never mulched this garden. I have beets here that have to be harvested soon. Right, let's see if I can find one here. I've got beets, but they're kind of, some spots you can get away with not mulching beets more than others, and weeds and beets can get along if you keep the weed height lower than the beet height. Right, so weeds don't always, damage your plants. But what I think was lacking here was the weeds are definitely of a height where they're out competing the plants. And I have weeds because I didn't mulch this. But also during the really hot July days, because there's no mulch, look, you can see bare soil right there. Right, because there's no mulch here, as those beets were developing, they just weren't getting optimal moisture from the soil. They couldn't find moisture. Right, so they just didn't grow as well as they ordinarily would have. I've grown beets in this location before. It's not the best spot. South is in that direction. There's a bit of shade. Right, the first 2 feet of the garden bed never does well because there's so much damn shade. But I can definitely normally grow beets in this spot, in this soil, in this location. Right, I normally just move the beets. The beets would have been there last year. They're here this year. Next year they'll be over here where these carrots are. Right, now these were mulched and a reasonably nice looking carrot garden. Not mulched, weedy mess, stunted beets. But I've got a few, I think, that are maybe decent. Right? No, really not. There's not a lot of nice ones. A bit of size over here, but normally I'm pulling like, and they're still not huge. Normally I'm pulling baseball and softball sized beets out of my garden this time of year, which is not what I have this year. And it's because I didn't mulch this. Here's a onion garden where I didn't get a mulch on. Now this one doesn't get the best sun because it's next to this apple tree that is in the wrong place, this apple tree. But anyway, I got onions here, right? But they would have done a lot better if I'd mulched this. Right? They just would have got more optimal sunlight, right? So as an onion garden, this worked, right? I did get onions, but the size is not optimal. Like they're sort of 2 inches in diameter on average. Here's a spot where I grew onions where I did use a mulch, and sure there's some clearly there's some weeds here, right? But generally speaking, look at that, right? The weeds that are here, really, they're relatively recent inhabitants of the garden, right? They're sort of later in the season. But it's really not, it looks worse than it is. But yeah, if I move this stuff aside, you can see, and it's time to harvest these. Right? Look at the size of these ones. Here, I'll bring these over and compare them to the other ones. Right? Mulch, no mulch. Now, to be fair, we got a bit of shade from this tree, right? So, not a perfect comparison, but I do think the big difference here is the effect of the mulch. Here's a garden here where I had no mulch on this garden, and if you look at my garden tour videos over the course of the season, These eggplants were just sort of pathetic looking, and this was just a giant weed bed, and the plants were stressed. And towards the end of the season, I pulled all the weeds, put down paper, threw the weeds back on top of the paper to see if I could salvage something, right? And I mean, the difference was night and day. The plants really grew and sort of took off. I don't know if I'll get decent eggplant before frost comes. I should have mulched these. I think I would have got a decent yield. You can see I got like, this is a special variety, sort of fast growing variety. So I got some, they're forming, but I mean, we're gonna have frost any day now, right? A couple nights ago it was 5 Celsius. So, you know, we got a couple little ones over here, right? But it's not enough, right? So, I mean, by getting some paper down and getting some mulch down, I salvaged the garden. But by not mulching it, I set these plants back considerably, because there was a good month during the hottest part of the summer when there was amazing sunlight, but these plants weren't getting optimum moisture. You know, in my garden, I'm not out here watering things. I don't have drip irrigation. I don't water things with a hose. Generally speaking, I sow everything in the spring. I mulch the whole garden. I don't water it all summer long, and everything works out fine because it's mulched. So the linchpin of this garden functioning properly is mulch. Having everything mulched. If everything isn't mulched, you know, the plants just don't get what they need during those hot months, and they suffer as a result. Here we got a zucchini bed. This is about 7 feet by 7 feet. And I mean, these zucchini did not, again, I didn't mulch this, and the plants were small and they weren't looking that good. And, you know, probably almost a month later, a month behind schedule, I actually got around to mulching this. It was so bad, there were so many weeds, I actually ended up using some leaf bag paper just to smother everything out and just sort of get the thing under control. And I salvaged the zucchini garden. So I didn't get the number of zucchini I normally get, but I got all the zucchini we could possibly want. We just normally have insane amounts of zucchini. You know, so this year, instead of having insane zucchini, I got enough. So I salvaged the garden. You can see they're still producing, right? And I mean, these are not, zucchini, generally speaking, I can get them 3 feet high, right? And these ones are maybe 2 feet high. So, you know, I'm probably getting like 2/3 of the production I would normally get. I was able to salvage. I do not think they would have achieved that if I hadn't got the mulch down, because the mulch allowed the soil to retain some moisture, right? The roots to find the stuff they need. You know, everything in a garden runs on moisture. If you don't have moisture, you know, it doesn't matter how fertile your soil is. If the right amount of moisture isn't available in the soil, the plants can't suck those nutrients out of the ground, right? The whole thing runs on moisture. So you have to find a way to keep the soil moist, other than just watering it all the time, right? And soils tend to just do so much better when they're kept mulched. And here's a good example of a properly mulched garden, right? Where I planted squash, spaced them out, right? And I've got there's one there, right? Right, there's one right there. These are called sweet mama squash. They're like a nice sort of golden orange sort of flesh, very tasty. But this garden, I haven't done a thing. I mean, I planted the seeds. When they were 6 inches high, I mulched them. When they're a little bit bigger, I chose, you know, each location. I planted like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I probably planted 6 plants here, but in each location I planted about 3, and I thinned them down to 1, right? So I mean, all I did was put the seeds in the ground, you know, keep them watered for about 2 weeks while they germinated. Once they're about 6 inches high, I got the mulch down. Once they're a little bit bigger, I sort of choose which ones were going to stay and which ones were gone. And I haven't done a thing. Haven't watered this, haven't fertilized it, haven't done nothing. It's just a self-sustaining, perpetuating garden. No work. Here are these collard greens. This garden wasn't mulched until probably July. These plants recovered. So at the point in time when I actually got this mulch down, and you can see I didn't normally use bags of leaves and stuff like that. I actually bought this sawdust. This is for like chickens and stuff like that, because I was just desperate. I had no mulch, and I just had to get, you know, had to source it somehow. So that's what I did. But at the point in time when I actually put this mulch down, these were really, really sad looking collard greens. And now they just look beautiful. I see, of course, I spaced them out. Each plant's about 16 inches apart. Really, they should be 2 feet apart, but I tend to plant things a bit tighter than the rules. But, you know, they really come along, right? And I mean, some people would argue that you shouldn't use something like this because it'll take nitrogen out of the soil. When I put this down, I put compost at the base of every single plant, and then I put this down. And I mean, I put this down when the roots were well established. I mean, the only nitrogen that a mulch like this, which is not an ideal mulch, I agree. The only nitrogen a mulch like this takes out of the soil is from the very, top, let's say, inch or ½ inch of the soil, right? That's where the mulch is interacting with the soil. It's not down in the soil, it's on top of the soil. So it might be depleting the nitrogen at the very top layer of the soil, but that's not where the roots of these plants are getting their nutrients, right? The roots of these plants are way, way down below. And, just as to insulate or to mitigate that to whatever extent was possible, because the plants looked so sad when I thinned and put this mulch down. I actually put, let's say, half a wheelbarrow full, one of those containers full. I would have been half full, right? So some of my mulch was ready. So I just put, a couple good handfuls at the base of each plant before I got the mulch down. And they really seem to have enjoyed that. Just a note on mulches for those that, aren't, are new to my channel and that sort of thing. You're not limited in what you can use. You can use whatever. You can see in this bed, I had some of those wood shavings. I used those. Here in the middle, I got some grass clippings, right? I use whatever I can get, right? This bed over here had potatoes. I used leaves for this one. That's the best, and to me, that's the best mulch. I like using leaves. There's no seeds in it. Doesn't cost anything. People gather it up and put it in bags and leave it at the end of the driveway for you. Leaves are the best mulch, in my opinion. They're great. Here you can see this this carrot garden. Right? Got a lovely grass clipping mulch. Don't let anybody tell you different. Grass clipping make amazing mulch. Right? Smothers out weeds really, really well. Got a lot of nitrogen in it. Basically, if you put an inch of grass clippings down on your garden, it's like fertilizer. Every time it rains, your plants are going to get a big boost, right? And look at this bed over here. This was a garlic garden for most of the summer, and then once the garlic were all harvested, I plucked some kale out of this bed and stuck them in over here, and they didn't look too good, right? And then I one time we mowed the lawn. Normally I just, use a mulching blade when I mow the lawn, but this one time I said, let's bag up some of the grass clippings. Put the grass clippings down, and then look how healthy this kale looks, right? Where I live here, kale will it'll continue to grow into October, and then it kind of slows down a little bit. Yeah, it's a really healthy, strong, vibrant, nice color, beautiful looking kale, right? And that's all running on these grass clippings. It's a fantastic mulch to use grass clippings. So I mean, you can see in the garden, there's places I've used hay, places I've used straw, places I've used wood shavings, places I use leaves, places I've used grass clippings, places I've used seaweed, right? Use whatever you can get. My two favorite things are grass clippings and leaves because they're the cheapest and easiest things to get, and they work, right? All the sort, it really don't let anyone convince you that one is better than another. It all works, right? Every single one of those materials goes in one end of something, goes out the other end of something, gets pooped into your soil, becomes a fertilizer for your plants. It all works, right? All of it keeps your soil organisms happy. Everything works. Use what you can get easily enough, right? For me, that's the things people tend to bag and leave at the end of their driveway. And I even use the bags, as you've seen in some of these beds. If it's got bad weeds and stuff like that, just rip the bags up and put the paper down on the soil, and maybe put something on top to hold the paper from blowing away. Makes an excellent mulch. It's not sort of the most nutrient dense one, but it keeps the soil from drying out. Soil organisms eat it, maintains the moisture levels. It works. It's better than nothing. Even a paper bag is better than nothing, right? Lots of people are big fans of using wood chips. Well, paper bags, wood chips. It was wood, right? And now it's paper. Even if it's, some people get bent out of shape when they see I'm using leaf bags because they've got, ink on them. Isn't that ink toxic? They'll ask, stuff like that. As far as I know, the ink on leaf bags is vegetable-based ink. Any toxins in that are not really negligible or meaningless, or if there is any at all. It's not. I don't worry about it. I don't spend my life worrying about things like that. Fear is the mind killer, right? Anyway, I think I've beaten this topic to death. I think you get the point. Mulches are good. Not mulching is not good. If you want to have a really healthy, good-looking garden, use a mulch. Every bed in my garden where I've used a mulch, I got good results. Every bed where I haven't used a mulch, I got bad results. There's advantages early in the season to not having the mulch on the garden because it heats up the soil, and there's certain pests that really thrive in a mulch, like slugs and snails. So when plants are really small and vulnerable to pests like that, there's an argument for having the mulch off for a short period of time. But once your plants are 6 inches high, get that mulch on there. There's just so much to gain. I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. Check out my column, my weekly column at maritimegardening.substack.com. Subscribe, and maybe you can win a gift certificate at the online seed provider of your choice. My first 100 subscribers, one of those people will be chosen, and I'll give them a $100 gift certificate for whatever seed. As long as the seed provider where you buy your seeds online sells gift certificates, I will buy you a $100 gift certificate for that seed provider. If you're one of the first 100, or if you're one of the next 100, you can get every 100 subscribers. I start this thing over again, trying to get people, to be paid subscribers to my weekly column, 1,000 words a week. Every Tuesday morning, I have a column up there, new thoughts, new considerations. It's just a different format for what I'm doing here. When I'm in the garden, I'm usually out working here. I bring the camera, and if I get an idea for a video, I just turn the camera on and start talking. It's spontaneous, and I got all this energy and that sort of thing. But there's something about sitting down and writing. I can organize my thoughts. I can I kind of write for a living. It's a job I have. I have a boring office job. I write for a living. And what I basically do is organize arguments. In being able to write a weekly column, I can take some of the things I think about when I'm out in the garden and really put my thoughts together and share sort of the inner workings, of my curiosity with the reader. So it's just a different way of doing it. I enjoy it, but it takes time. It takes energy. It takes it takes an investment of time to write a 1,000-word article once a week. So some of the material on there is anyone can read it. So you can subscribe for free and get that. But if you want to be able to see everything, if you want to be able to comment, and if you want a chance to win that gift certificate, you got to be a paid subscriber. It's $30 for a year or $5 for a month. It's not a lot. If you want to help support the channel, instead of just giving me money on Patreon, there should be a quid pro quo. So if you help support the channel, subscribe to my Substack page, maritimegardening.substack.com. Be a paid subscriber, and that'll help support everything I'm doing here. So if you found this video interesting, if you did, please like, share, subscribe. Until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.